Every time Americans buy a simple product, a silent money machine starts running. And by the end of the year, it transfers hundreds of billions of dollars straight into China's economy. But here's the shocking part. Most people have no idea how the system really works. The number appeared on screens worldwide on January 14th, 2026, a figure so vast it seemed to defy economics. China's trade surplus, $1.2 trillion for the year 2025. To understand that number, you must first erase the image of a nation. Think, instead of an entire economy, vanished. That $1.2 trillion is the equivalent of swallowing the complete annual economic output of a nation like the Netherlands or Switzerland. It is wealth accumulation on a scale history has rarely seen, extracted not from mines or oil fields, but from the global marketplace. But hidden within that staggering global figure is a more intimate, more urgent story for America. The direct trade surplus with the United States alone stood at $295 billion in 2024. Think of it this way. Every single day, nearly $810 million in net value flows from American pocketbooks, corporate ledgers, and national wealth into the Chinese economic machine. Annually, that's a financial current stronger than the entire economic output of Finland or Chile vanishing across the Pacific. This is not trade. This is a transfusion. For decades, we've been sold a simple story: globalization, a world where efficiency wins, where consumers get cheaper goods and economies intertwine for mutual benefit. But this narrative has quietly served as the perfect camouflage for a financial architecture of breathtaking precision and consequence. While we shopped for discount electronics and affordable apparel, a machine was built. A machine designed for one purpose: systematic, persistent wealth transfer. This isn't about politics or conspiracy, it's about engineering. The gears of this machine are currency, capital, and control, and they have been turning in plain sight for over 40 years, dismantling American industrial capacity, bolt by bolt, dollar by dollar. To see the machine, we must first understand its oldest and most powerful gear, the currency gear. Imagine two nations playing a game of economic tug-of-war with a rope that is their exchange rate. One nation, its hands free, lets the rope slide naturally, its position dictated by the market's pull. The other nation has its hands locked, braced, and reinforced by the full weight of its state apparatus, holding the rope firmly in a position of its own choosing. This is not a fair match. It is a strategy. A deliberately undervalued currency acts as a permanent invisible subsidy on every single export and a permanent tariff on every import. It makes foreign goods magically cheap and your own goods stubbornly expensive. For China, this meant that the Made in China tag came with a hidden government-funded discount, paid for by systematically suppressing the value of the yuan. How? When Chinese factories exported goods and earned dollars, those dollars flooded back home. In a free market, this demand for yuan would cause its value to soar, making future exports more expensive and balancing the scales. But the People's Bank of China intervened relentlessly, printing yuan to buy up those incoming dollars, preventing the natural appreciation. The dollars were siphoned into vast reservoirs, foreign exchange reserves that swelled to nearly $4 trillion. That's more money than the total value of everything produced in Germany in a year, all accumulated to hold a currency line in the sand. But currency manipulation alone isn't enough. Wealth that flows in can just as easily flow out. This is where the second gear engages: capital controls. China built not just a wall around its currency, but a fortress. For the average Chinese citizen, moving wealth abroad is strictly limited. For corporations, capital flight is policed. This trapped the wealth generated by the American consumer inside China's financial system. It couldn't cycle back to buy equivalent amounts of American goods or invest freely in American assets in a way that would naturally correct the imbalance. The surplus dollars were captured. And they needed a purpose, which leads us to the third, most ingenious gear of the machine: the recycling mechanism. China now sat on mountains of dollars. Letting them sit was wasteful. Letting the yuan rise was unthinkable. It would break the export model. So they were funneled back into the very heart of the American system, U.S. Treasury bonds. China became a primary financier of American government debt. This created a deceptively comfortable, self-perpetuating loop. America bought cheap Chinese goods with dollars. China took those dollars and loaned them back to the U.S. government, funding deficit spending and keeping American interest rates artificially low. Low interest rates fueled more American consumption and borrowing, which funded more purchases of Chinese goods. The circle was closed. Each nation became addicted to the other's dysfunction. America to cheap debt and cheap goods, China to the endless appetite of the American consumer. The result was not an accident of the free market. It was the predictable, calculated outcome of a closed financial circuit. But this circuit required one more critical component to reach its devastating potential, a key that America itself handed over. Most people never hear the next part, and that's the real danger, because this financial machine didn't just appear, It was invited, accelerated, and turbocharged by a decision made in Washington, a decision that would unlock the floodgates and change the face of the American heartland forever. The year was 2001. A sense of inevitability hung in the air, the inevitable march of globalization. That December, China formally joined the World Trade Organization, WTO. In boardrooms and government offices, this was hailed as a victory for free trade, a final embrace of China into the rules-based global order. It was framed as the closing act of the Cold War. But in the blueprint of the wealth transfer machine, this wasn't an ending. It was the ignition sequence. WTO accession gave Chinese exporters something priceless: permanent normal trade relations and predictable, unfettered access to the world's largest, most open consumer market, the United States. The protective gears of currency control and capital containment were now hooked directly to the engine of American demand. The effect was seismic. Between 2000 and 2024, U.S. imports from China exploded from $100 billion to over $438 billion. American exports to China grew too, but from a tiny base, reaching only $143 billion by 2024. The gap wasn't closing. It was a canyon being dug deeper every year. This was the moment the abstract financial architecture made landfall, on Main Street, USA. The story of the next decade is written in the hollowed-out factories and shattered communities of the American industrial heartland. The China shock wasn't an economic theory. It was the sound of silence where machinery once hummed. Research paints a stark portrait. Between 1.5 and 2 million American manufacturing jobs vanished between 2000 and 2011, directly due to the trade deficit with China. By 2024, the total stood at 4.5 million jobs gone since the turn of the millennium, a 26% evaporation of an entire sector. But these numbers are ghosts. To give them flesh, you must visit the towns they left behind. Picture a mid-sized city in Ohio or Michigan. For 3 generations, the rhythm of life was set by the shift whistle of the auto plant or the appliance factory. It provided not just a wage, but an identity, a community center, a stable tax base for schools and parks. Then, almost overnight, the work vanished. The factory didn't modernize, didn't move to another state. Its function was replicated across the ocean, powered by the financial advantages of the currency and subsidy machine. The cheap goods arriving in containers at Los Angeles Long Beach came at a cost far higher than their price tags. They carried with them the dissolution of community, spikes in deaths of despair from drugs and alcohol, declining life expectancy, and a psychic wound of obsolescence. The benefits of cheaper televisions and tools were diffuse, spread across hundreds of millions of consumers who saved a few dollars. The costs were catastrophically concentrated, devastating specific regions and creating political and social fault lines that would fracture the nation. Meanwhile, the machine gained new layers of sophistication. The subsidy architecture beneath China's export engine is a labyrinth of state support. It's not just about a weak currency. It's direct cash injections, land offered at below-market rates, energy subsidies, and loans from state-owned banks at rates no private competitor could ever match. Studies estimate China's industrial subsidies are 3 to 4 times larger relative to its economy than those in major Western nations. State-owned enterprises operate with dual mandates: achieve commercial goals, but also serve as instruments of national industrial policy, maintaining production even at a loss to ensure global dominance in sectors deemed strategic. We see this play out in solar panels, steel, aluminum, and now electric vehicles. Chinese companies, buoyed by this ocean of support, can sell below cost for years, a strategy known as dumping. Foreign competitors, playing by market rules, cannot compete. They go bankrupt. Once the competition is eliminated, control over the entire supply chain is consolidated. The trade surplus wealth is recycled to fund this conquest of industry after industry. This is where the story transcends economics and enters the realm of power. Manufacturing isn't just about making things. It's the furnace where innovation is forged. The process of building creates problems that demand solutions, leading to research, development, and technological leaps. When you offshore production, you offshore that learning cycle. As China's share of global manufacturing ballooned from 3% in 1995 to over 30% today, it didn't just assemble gadgets. It absorbed technology, reverse-engineered processes, and built a formidable ecosystem of innovation, now crystallized in plans like Made in China 2025, which explicitly targets dominance in robotics, aerospace, and semiconductors. America was left with a dangerous asymmetry: a consumption-based economy financed by debt, facing a production-based economy financed by surplus. We sent them dollars for goods. They sent us back loans, creating the illusion of a balance while the fundamental pillars of our economic power, productive capacity, and technological edge were quietly eroded. But what happens next will change everything. Because the most shocking part of this story isn't what China did, it's what America didn't do. The terrifying truth is that this wealth transfer required a partner, a willing, almost compliant participant on the other side of the Pacific. And the reason for that compliance leads us into the darkest, most uncomfortable corner of this entire system. Here lies the uncomfortable, contrarian heart of the matter. The wealth transfer machine could not have run for a single year without lubrication from Washington and Wall Street. This was not a heist, where one clever thief outsmarted a vigilant guard. It was a transaction where powerful interests on both sides saw benefit, even as the long-term health of the American economy was traded for short-term gain. Think of the American constituencies that profited from this imbalanced flow. Multinational corporations reveled in soaring profit margins, leveraging cheap Chinese labor and the currency advantage to boost shareholder returns. The Wall Street financial complex thrived on the globalization of capital flows, fee generation, and the deep liquid treasury market sustained by Chinese purchases. The political establishment benefited from low inflation, the China price, and artificially low interest rates that enabled deficit spending without immediate pain. The American consumer, for a time, enjoyed an unprecedented array of affordable goods. This created a powerful, diffuse alliance with a vested interest in the status quo. The costs, the evisceration of manufacturing towns in the Midwest and South, were geographically and politically concentrated. The benefits were spread wide and thin. In the calculus of political economy, the concentrated pain of Ohio was no match for the diffuse comfort of Oregon, Florida, and New York. Policy tools that could have countered the imbalance, like enforcing WTO rules against subsidies, imposing countervailing duties on currency-manipulated goods, or restricting the recycling of surplus dollars into strategic U.S. assets, were left in the toolbox, deemed too provocative, too disruptive to the comfortable arrangement. This is the psychological masterstroke of the system. It made complicity feel like convenience. It framed dependence as interdependence. The most common defense of the status quo became, we could never afford to decouple. Our economies are too intertwined. But this intertwining was not a natural vine. It was a deliberately grafted bond, and it created a perilous dependency. America became dependent on China for the financing of its debt and the goods on its shelves. China became dependent on America as the consumer of last resort. This mutual hostage situation is not stability. It is a fragile equilibrium waiting for a shock. And the shock may come from within the machine itself. The final, overlooked dimension of this wealth transfer is its role as a hidden engine of American debt. China's accumulation of dollars through trade surpluses directly enabled the explosion of the U.S. national debt from $5.6 trillion in 2000 to over $30 trillion today. They weren't just buying our products, they were buying our future obligations. This kept interest rates suppressed, creating a phantom sense of affordability for endless government spending. We were living not on our own productivity, but on the savings of our strategic rival, funneled back to us as loans against our own future. This cannot last. Systems built on such profound imbalances do not gently correct. They break. History's lesson is clear. In 1985, the Plaza Accord was a coordinated, desperate attempt to adjust the massive trade imbalances with Japan and Germany. It worked technically, currencies adjusted, but it helped trigger Japan's catastrophic asset bubble and subsequent lost decades. Today's imbalances are orders of magnitude larger, the debt deeper, and the geopolitical tensions infinitely more dangerous. We now face a trilemma with three bad options. Option 1, continue. This path leads to ever greater debt, more hollowing out, and the eventual inevitable loss of confidence in the dollar, triggering a currency and inflation crisis. Option 2, a sudden crisis-driven rupture, a trade war that escalates, a sanction that triggers sell-off of treasuries, causing interest rates to spike and plunging both economies into recession. Option 3, a painful, deliberate decoupling, a strategic, managed unwinding of the dependency involving tariffs, industrial policy, capital controls, and the rebuilding of domestic capacity, a process that will be expensive, inflationary, and politically fraught. There is no painless exit. The 40-year transfer of hundreds of billions annually was not just a line on a trade ledger. It was the transfer of factory floors and engineering expertise, of supply chain sovereignty, and ultimately, of foundational economic power. The $1.2 trillion surplus announced in 2026 is not a Chinese victory lap. It is a screaming alarm from the dashboard of the American project. The question is no longer how the machine works. The evidence is irrefutable. The real question is whether we have the collective will to turn it off, to choose the certain pain of rebuilding over the catastrophic risk of collapse. The wealth has already flowed. The factories are already silent. The time for convenient stories is over. What remains is a choice, and its consequence will define the next American century. This has been an exploration of quiet currents and loud consequences. If this interconnected web of finance, power, and policy has changed your perspective, then our mission at Economic Tales is just beginning. We exist to pull back the curtain on the forces that shape your livelihood and your future. The story doesn't end here. Subscribe to Economic Tales for the next chapter, where we dissect the escape routes, what strategic sovereignty really looks like in a world of entrenched dependencies. Because understanding the problem is only the first step. Building the solution is everything.